The night before my Harvard interview, I slept in my car. Not because I had forgotten to book a hotel, not because I was being careless or spontaneous or any of the things people sometimes romanticize about living without a fixed address. I slept in my car because it was the only option I had, and I had learned by that point in my life to be grateful for options rather than resentful of their limitations. I had driven 4 hours to get to Cambridge, which had taken most of the gas money I had been saving for 3 weeks. And I parked on a street that felt impossibly clean and impossibly quiet, and I reclined the seat as far as it would go. And I lay there looking at the ceiling of a car I had been living out of for 7 months, and I thought about what I was going to say. The next morning, to a panel of people who had never had to think about where they were going to sleep the night before anything. I had a blazer. I want you to know that because the blazer matters. I had found it at a thrift store 6 weeks earlier. And I had paid $4 for it, and I had kept it in a dry cleaning bag in the back seat, protected from everything. Because I had known even then that there would be a moment when I needed to walk into a room and not let the room decide who I was before I had the chance to speak. That blazer was not vanity. It was strategy. It was the understanding, earned through years of watching people look at me and see only the surface of my circumstances. That the world makes decisions about you in the first 8 seconds, and that those decisions are almost impossible to reverse once they have been made. I had learned to manage those 8 seconds with everything I had. Let me go back further, because the Harvard interview was not the beginning of the story. It was barely the middle. The beginning was a house in a neighborhood that I will not name because the name is not the point. And a family that was held together by love and also by the specific fragility of people who are always one emergency away from losing what little they have. My mother worked 2 jobs for most of my childhood. My father was present in the way that people are present when they are there in body but somewhere else. Somewhere else entirely in every way that matters. We moved often, always to somewhere slightly smaller and slightly more temporary than the place before. And by the time I was 12, I had attended 6 different schools and had learned that the most dangerous thing you could do in a new place was let people know too much. Knowledge about your circumstances was leverage in the hands of people who wanted to use it, and children are not less capable of cruelty than adults. They are simply less practiced at disguising it. I was a reader from the beginning, not because anyone pushed me toward it, but because books were the one place where my circumstances did not follow me. Inside a book, I was not the girl who wore the same 2 outfits on rotation, or who ate free lunch, or who flinched when the teacher asked everyone to bring in a permission slip because permission slips cost money. Inside a book, I was just a person, which is to say I was exactly as large and as capable and as worthy of a full life as any other person. And that feeling, the feeling of being fully human without having to justify it, was so precious to me that I protected it the way I later protected that blazer. Carefully in a clean space, away from everything that might damage it. School was complicated not because I was not capable. I was capable in ways that surprised teachers who had already made decisions about me based on my file, based on my address, based on the accumulated paperwork of a life that looked on the outside like a series of deficits. I was capable in ways that made some of them uncomfortable. Because capability in a student you have already written off requires a revision of the story you have been telling yourself, and revision is uncomfortable. There was one teacher. There is always one teacher in these stories, and I am aware of how that sounds, how close it comes to the version of this narrative. That gets told in movies where the exceptional educator sees the diamond in the rough and the music swells and everything changes. That is not quite what happened. What happened was that she gave me a book that I had not asked for, and she said nothing about it except I thought you might find this useful. And she never made a production of it, and she never asked me what I thought of it afterward, and she never positioned herself as my savior. She just handed me a book and got out of the way. The book was about a woman who had come from nothing and built something. It was intellectual. It was the architecture of a mind that had refused to accept the version of itself that its circumstances suggested was the only version available. I read it in one night on the floor of the apartment we were living in at the time, a 1-bedroom that housed 4 people. And I finished it at 3 in the morning, and I lay there in the dark, and I felt something shift in my chest that I would not have been able to name at the time, but that I understand now as the specific sensation of a possibility arriving in your body before your mind has caught up with it. I was going to go to college, not because anyone in my life had mapped that path, but because I had just understood for the first time that my mind was mine. That no circumstance could reach inside my mind and take what I had built there. And what I had built there was worth protecting, worth investing in, worth fighting for. The homelessness did not arrive dramatically. That is the first thing I want to correct. They imagine a sudden catastrophe, a single night where everything collapsed. What actually happened was slower and more ordinary, and in some ways more devastating. It happened the way most hard things happen, gradually and then all at once. By the time the all at once arrived, I had already been preparing for it without knowing I was preparing for it, developing muscles for when the ground is unreliable. My mother lost her second job in March. The first job had already been reduced to part-time in January. The apartment could not be sustained. And the math of that was simple and brutal and left no room for negotiation. We had 6 weeks. I was 19. I had graduated high school the previous June and had spent the intervening months working 2 jobs myself and saving with the specific discipline of someone who understood that the window was narrow. I had been researching colleges, not casually, but with the focused intensity of someone who has identified the one door that might lead somewhere different. I had been reading about financial aid, about application fee waivers, about the schools that met 100% of demonstrated financial need. I had a list. The list was folded in my wallet. I had been carrying it for 4 months. When the apartment became impossible, I did not tell anyone. I moved what I could into my car, which was a 2003 sedan with a check engine light that had been on for so long I had stopped seeing it. And I found a neighborhood where overnight parking was not restricted, and I established a routine with the same deliberateness that I imagine people establish routines. Finding the 24-hour gym where I could shower for the cost of a monthly membership that was cheaper than any other option available to me. Finding the library that opened earliest and closed latest. Finding the diner where the staff did not ask questions if you nursed a coffee for 2 hours. Routine was survival. Routine was also dignity. I want to be careful about that word because I know how it sounds in proximity to a car and a gym shower. But dignity is not a function of circumstance. It is a function of intention. And I was intensely intentional because intentionality was the one thing they couldn't take. I applied to 11 schools from a library computer. I want you to hold that image for a moment because it is accurate and accuracy matters. A library computer with a 45-minute time limit per session, a phone that I kept charged at the gym and that I used as a hotspot when the library was closed, application essays written in a notes app at 2 in the morning in the front seat of my car because the library was not open and I needed somewhere to put the words. I wrote about what I knew. I did not dress it up or make it palatable or soften the edges so the reader would be comfortable. I wrote about what it is like to study for a calculus exam in a car in November when the heat only works if the engine is running and running the engine costs gas you are rationing. I wrote about what it is like to be intelligent in a context that has no infrastructure for your intelligence, where being smart sometimes closes doors. I wrote about the list in my wallet, about why the list existed, about what it meant to carry names that represented not escape, but expansion, toward a version of myself that I could already see clearly enough to describe and was not yet sure I would survive long enough to become. The Harvard application was the last one I submitted. I almost did not submit it, not because I thought I was unworthy. I had moved past that question. I almost did not submit it because I was afraid of what it would mean if I did, and they still said no. The other schools felt like realistic reaches. But I submitted it at 11:47 on the night of the deadline from the parking lot of the gym with 11% battery remaining. And I sat there after I hit submit and I felt nothing for a long moment, and then I felt everything, and then I felt nothing again, and I drove to my parking spot. And I reclined the seat and I stared at the ceiling and I thought about the blazer and the list and the woman in the book, and I thought, you have done everything. Whatever comes next, you will handle because handling things is what you do. And then I closed my eyes and I slept better than I had in months. The acceptance letter arrived on a Thursday morning in April. I was in the library when my phone buzzed. I opened it standing between 2 shelves. In the reference section, still wearing my coat because I had come in from the cold 30 seconds earlier and had not yet had time to take it off, I read the first line. I read it again. I walked to the bathroom and I stood at the sink and I looked at myself in the mirror for a long time. Not crying, not celebrating, just looking. Because the person in the mirror was the same person who had slept in a car the night before her interview, the same person who had written essays at 2 in the morning, the same person everyone had already decided was going somewhere smaller, somewhere less, somewhere that confirmed the story they had already written. And I wanted to memorize her face before anything changed, because she was not someone to leave behind. She was the reason I had gotten here. When I walked into Harvard for the first time, I carried everything: the car, the blazer, the list, the library computers, the cold, all of it. Because the girl who survived all of that was not the before. She was always the point. She was always enough. She always belonged.